Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our spring gardening lecture series. This lecture series is a part of an offering from the North Fulton Master Gardeners group. My name is Danny Morris. I'm with the Central Fulton Gardeners, Master Gardeners group. We're part of the UGA Extension Volunteer program, and we're so happy that you're here with us today. If you're in Atlanta, you know that we have a rainy day and a couple of things. That's a great day for ferns, a good rainy day. And it's also a good day to be indoors listening to a presentation on ferns. So we'll spend the next hour talking about all the different aspects of growing ferns in your garden. There's a way for you to ask questions, and you can post those questions in the question and answer box on Zoom, and you will find that at the end of the presentation, we will answer those questions as best we can for you. My name is Danny Morris. I'm a North Georgia native. I grew up around the ferns in the South and North Georgia. I grew up in an agricultural environment. Had grandparents who were farmers and a dad who was a farmer in the later years of his career. I attended Georgia Tech, and I've been in Atlanta for 50 years or more, and have been a UGA Master Gardener Extension volunteer for the last 5 years. I volunteer with the Botanical Garden, Habitat for Humanity, and I also do some work around golf grounds volunteering there. So that's a little bit about me, and let's spend some time talking about ferns. Today, I'm going to spend a few minutes just talking in general about the facts about ferns, just some things that I found interesting that I think you might find interesting about ferns in general. And then we'll talk about how ferns look, what's a little bit of the biology of that, how can we grow them, and then we'll go through a number of examples of ferns that grow well in the Southeast. We won't venture outside that Southeast topic. This is the class that's appropriate for the map that you can see there for growing zone 7 and 8 in Georgia. If you're outside that area, and I know we have some people who have signed up for our lecture from outside that general 7 and 8 growing zone, either somewhere else in Georgia, somewhere else in the United States, or maybe somewhere else in the world. We're not going to touch on anything outside our Atlanta area growing zone, if you will. If you have questions about that, you can consult the extension office in your area, or you can send us a question, and if there's a way for us to help, we'll be glad to help with that. But just please know that we're going to focus on the Georgia area, the North Georgia area for this discussion today. I want to take just a minute and tell you a couple of things about ferns that I think are kind of interesting. You've probably seen some fossil records of ferns that have been uncovered potentially 300 to 400 million years ago. To put that in just a little bit of perspective, dinosaurs appeared on the earth about 225 million years ago. So ferns were already there, and 100 million years before that, if those numbers work for you. You can see a big picture up there of a dinosaur that somebody took with their iPhone, I'm sure, and there are ferns in that picture there. So clearly, ferns were on Earth before dinosaurs, according to that picture. It's estimated that 75% of the coal in our coal regions came from giant tree ferns. There are a number of ferns. We're going to talk about 15 or 20 different types of ferns today. Just know that there are 15,000 species of ferns known worldwide. I've seen numbers as high as 20,000. In Georgia, there are 100 to 120 different types, different species of ferns. Ferns spread rapidly. They are, as noted here, promiscuous in that there are just a number of hybrid species of ferns. They continue to hybrid themselves, and they continue to spread themselves very naturally. And we'll talk about how that happens. ferns would adjust their rate of growth to growing conditions, and as you'll see as we talk about how ferns propagate, a fern can spread its growth across a very, very large region. We'll take a look at how the spores of a fern drop off during the year, and when those spores drop off, they are picked up by the wind and carried around the world. So ferns can drop in your yard, ferns can drop in a forest. If they find good growing conditions, great organic growing conditions with great soil, they'll drop and grow. And if you're like me, around your yard or around your farm or around the area that you like to garden in, you might just one day look down and see a fern and you kind of wonder how that got there. And it may have come from a neighbor, and it may have come from another part of the country. And in fact, it could get up into a jet stream and come from another part of the world. So you're out on a hike and you see ferns stuck up under the corner of a rock. That's how they got there. So just a very interesting plant, very interesting in how it moves and grows itself, moves around the world and moves around an area and grows itself. Ferns produce millions of spores. And as I say, they can travel great, great distances. A type of fern that you might see in a forest in another country might just pop into a forest in Georgia. Now, that fern may or may not last there, depending on conditions, depending on growing situation. It may or may not last there, but just know that that's how ferns move around. And we'll take a look at how the spores look on a fern and how they drop off and how they're picked up by the wind or picked up by animals and are moved from place to place. I want to talk a little bit about what ferns look like. All ferns are different. All different species are different. So some of these are going to make a lot of sense, and some of them are going to maybe not apply to a fern that you have or a fern that you've seen. And we'll take some pictures of how these look. We'll take a look at some pictures at how this looks. So you'll see all these different terms. But a frond is what you would normally think of when you think of a fern, and we'll take a look at some fronds from pictures that I've taken and some pictures that I've captured from other places. On that frond, there'll be multiple leaves. The leaves will contain a fruit band or a line of spore cases that contain the spores in there. In that blade and in that leaf, you'll see little tiny leaflets. So there could be one giant leaf that's split and divided into a bunch of different leaflets. And we'll take a look at all of these. Each one of those leaflets is arranged around a pinnae. And all these terms I'm going to just leave up here for a minute and let you take a look at them. Rhizomes this is a rhizome plant generally. There are roots and rhizomes below the ground, and we'll take a look at those and how they look. The spores are encased in a sori, and all of this is a part of a plant, and this is a picture of how those plants look. You'll also note on this plant at the bottom, there's a fiddlehead or a crozier, and that is a new fern that's popping up. So if you just take just a moment and look at this plant, all the terms from the previous page, you'll sort of see what each one of those terms, how they apply. Now, this is not necessarily going to be interesting to you just in how you grow a fern, but if you want to dig in just a little deeper and see what ferns look like and what they're about, to me, the main thing for me is, are my roots healthy? Am I keeping my entire frond healthy, a good color? Is it generating spores on the back of the leaf? And am I generating a lot of fiddleheads every year or a lot of croziers every year? Because that's what's going to uncurl and give me a new frond. So we're going to take a look at how that has worked. If you'll look over to the left of this, you'll see in my yard at the bottom right, you'll see some new growth on my ferns. I had I have some autumn ferns in the back of my yard, and they really took a hit from the super cold weather that came through in December and January this year, and they just did not look very good at all. I have trimmed them up, and you can see a lot of new growth, a lot of fiddleheads or croziers that are sticking up. A crozier is a term for a shepherd's crook, and so that's another name of that fiddlehead that's there. You might hear both those terms. But the autumn fern that's up top, you can see this is before I had cleaned out leaves and what have you. And I want to show you this same area again. We've had some terrific 80-degree days in Atlanta, and I'll show you how these how the fronds have produced or how the plant has produced these fiddleheads, and how the fiddleheads have opened up to become new fronds. So very, very interesting look at how this works. So on the far left, you'll see a Christmas fern. A friend of mine with a farm up in LJ sent me some pictures of a Christmas fern that has some croziers that are popping out on there. And then that same area that I just showed you, that were the picture in my yard of my autumn ferns, on the 15th of March, so just a week or two ago, you can see that was the status of my new growth, status of my croziers that are coming up. And then on the far right, so just 10 days later, with several 80-degree days and a little rain coming in, you can see how those croziers have started to open up, and back in the back, you can see some leaves and new growth coming from that. So just a wonderful exercise in the nature of ferns. All your plants are doing that. All my plants are doing this. But since today we're talking about ferns, I thought it was just really neat that we've had great rain, great weather, and you can see these plants opening up and see the new growth happening for them. You can grow ferns from these spores if you're interested in doing this. It takes a long time, and it might be a fun project to do with your children or grandchildren, but I'm not sure this is something that I want to spend my time doing, because there are a lot of ways to do it. But you can take the top part is something I pulled off of a different site, but this bottom picture on the bottom left, you can see on the back of my autumn ferns, you can see all the spore count that's moving along those different leaflets there. And you can remove these. You can shake them off, you can kind of peel them off, or you can just wait for them to drop and collect those and put them in a plastic bag. And if you want to read through this with me, you can see that when all those have dried down to the bottom, you can place those spores in a peat mixture. And after you do that, you can put them in a little saucer of water, let the water seep in so that you have a good moist base for these spores to grow, and then place those in a warm location. And eventually you'll get a green coating that'll appear on the top of your base, your peat or your soil. And in a few months, you'll begin to see some small fronds appearing out of this slimy mixture. The few months part is the part that I don't want to spend my time doing, because there's some great other ways to get ferns, and we'll talk about those. But it is an interesting exercise, and it's something that you can do, and you can make work. To me, an easier way to do this, particularly if you already have some good ferns, or your neighbor has a good fern, or some friend in another area has a good fern, is just divide them. And dividing ferns, if you've divided plants before, it's not a great mystery. I think the first thing in dividing ferns is to convince yourself that you can do this, and just be confident in what you're about to do. But when you're ready to divide ferns, you don't want to divide it at the driest time of all. If it has been very dry, you water the area ahead of time, maybe a week or two before you're going to divide the fern. And then you can begin letting that soak in, and then trim away, as you can see, trim away any dead areas that are around the fern. So you can see that trimmer there is just working around to get some, when you dig down under the fern, you're going to find some dead areas. You're going to find some areas that maybe look like they've been overwatered. They're dark and black, and they're just not as healthy looking as the rest of the area. So if you trim out as much of the debris and as much of the old part of the plant as you can, you'll be more successful when you get ready to dig a plant. And it'll be easier to dig up, because the fern, depending on how big it is, it can grow and spread out a couple of feet in a different direction. So if you're going to try to get around to the edge and dig a root ball, we'll take a look at that on the next slide. You want to make sure that you have a good clean area, and you're not digging up a bunch of stuff that you're not going to want, a bunch of stuff you're not going to need when you get ready to divide. So clean it up very good. Take some good sharp trimmers and just get everything out of there that's kind of yucky and mucky. And then you can take your shovel, and you can see here's a good root ball, and you can see that this root ball grew out into here. So when you get ready to dig, you're going to need to dig. If you don't want to damage, you're going to need to sort of do some sort of test spading and figure out how wide the root ball is and dig that root ball up. And so this says dig 3 to 6 inches away from most of the outside fronds. I've have some autumn ferns that are more than 6 inches away. So you can sort of experiment with that and see how far. You're not going to do damage unless you just really do a lot of hard digging and do some damage with the shovel. But you're not going to, it's kind of hard to make a mistake. You can dig around and then get that root ball up, and you can see what all is there. You'll see all of the different roots and hairs that are a part of that, and get the root ball up, and then get it soaked. I like to soak that again when it gets up, because it's going to be stressed from being moved. And as it says, very carefully extract the entire root ball. When you've done that, now this is obviously a different picture from a different root ball. When you've done that, you can split that root ball in 2. You can split it in 6, whatever size you want to split, and then just pull away the different parts of the plant with your hands, and just pull that into the area that you decide. So you can just you can cut the root ball and then stick your hand up into the part of the fern and down through the root ball and just pull it away. And it's going to tug, and it's going to seem like it's tearing, and it's going to tear some of the hairs, and it's going to tear some of the roots, and that's okay. You're just going to pull them from side to side, and you can get as many sections as that root ball will support from there. Once you've done that, and once you're convinced, if you look at this division, this division had a number of rhizomes and a number of just areas that need to be pulled apart. So just make sure you completely separated those, and that you have 2 new plants, if you will, that look like they can support being replanted. And you'll know what that looks like when you pull them apart. And again, I think the main thing is just to be confident that you're going to be able to do this without damage. It's a sensitive plant, but it's a hardy plant when it comes to things like this. And if I have divided ferns, replanted ferns, and thought I had made a mistake and that I had killed something, and the next year it comes back healthy, comes back big. It was a little mad at me for a while, but it got over it and it grew well. So be confident that you can get that done. You'll then end up with new plants. So you'll end up with a smaller version of the original plant, just new plants, just like you would with any other plant that you're splitting. And when you do that, you can expand your own garden. You can move to a different area of the yard, the garden. You can just move a couple of feet away and expand your own garden. I like to share these with my friends. I send them to my son's house, or I send them to a neighbor. And also, don't forget, you can share these in some plant sales. If you've got some containers that you've saved, you can repot your fern just like you would any other plant, and put those up for sale in the plant sale for your garden group. So that gives you a good look at how you can divide ferns. I have divided, these are some of the ferns in my garden. I've divided this holly fern. I divided all these autumn ferns, very easy to do. This is a maidenhair fern that I've taken apart and divided. Most of these are from my garden. This one plant of chain nettle fern, we'll talk about that in a minute. I took this picture at the Woodland Gardens Wooden Gardens Botanical Center, which is on Scott Boulevard in Atlanta. And if you want to take a nice walk and see a lot of ferns, they're pretty well organized. You can see it wasn't very clean on the day that I went, but it's just a beautiful little walk. And if you have not been over there, I would encourage you to go, particularly if you like to keep up with ferns, because they do have a lot of ferns over there. So let's take a look at some of the ferns that grow in southern gardens. And here's a list. This is not an exhaustive list, but we're going to talk about most of these. We're going to talk about lady ferns. We're going to talk about just very briefly about spleenwort. We'll talk about sensitive fern, cinnamon fern, Christmas ferns. So you can just see this list. This is a pretty good list. So when you, by the way, when this presentation is over, you will receive an email from us. If you signed up with your email, you'll receive an email from us, and you'll be able to go back and look at this information. So there's no reason to try to write really fast to try to keep up with some of these things. But for instance, if you want to know the size of a lady fern, just a range of sizes, is it wet or dry? Is it sunny or shady? Is it deciduous or is it evergreen? You can take a look at this chart, including all the botanical names. And there are a number of charts for a number of reasons, a number of regions, and keep those handy, and you'll know whether or not you're getting the right size. You'll know whether or not you're putting it in the right place in your yard, and you'll get a good feel for whether it's a wet or a dry plant, and whether it needs more sun or less sun, or can it take filtered sun. So just a great little chart here, and we're going to go through and take a look at most of these, and you'll get to see them in an environment where they are growing. The autumn ferns that are growing in my yard have just done a terrific job. They have grown higher than I want them to. This year I'm taking them back a little bit because they really get tall and they really fill out, and they're just a great plant. They have a great color. It's mostly an evergreen plant. It does get, depending on how cold it gets, if it's a pretty serious winter, they're going to turn brown and you're going to have to clean them up. But a lot of years I don't go trim them back. Thus they got too tall for me by not doing that. But they grow very, very well. They stay mostly disease-free. Most of the ferns in my yard, I have not experienced a lot of disease in them. I have these under some crepe myrtles. I have them just standalone. I have them under camellias. I've got a lot of autumn ferns spread around the yard, and they've just been a great plant for us. And by the way, I have not included a slide today or any discussion today on fertilizing ferns. My opinion is that you don't. You just sort of let them go. If your ferns start to look like they aren't feeling so good, like they're not healthy, and it's not wintertime, you know, if they're supposed to look good and they're not, some organic material, some compost, some sort of mulch that you like. I will oftentimes take the oak leaves out of my house and just double cut them and just spread them around and kind of put them up under something, and then put some more compost on top of that and just let that be my organic material to drop down in there. If you have a worm area or access to a worm garden, you can take worm castings, and that makes an excellent organic material to put around your ferns, just to kind of prop them up a little bit and give them a little bit of a healthy charge. But there are some fertilizers that are around that are similar to what you would put on some other plants, and you can try that if you want to try that. But in my opinion, I don't think that that's something that you need to do like you would do with azaleas or maybe other plants. This is a holly fern, again, something from my yard. I think this is a gorgeous plant to put underneath some things. I have moved this one out into the open because it was getting a little tired underneath some gardenia bushes that we had that were getting really high and thick. And this was sort of an accent piece that was under there. And so I moved it out by itself, and it's really done well out by itself. I will probably move it back underneath something later on. It does stay evergreen into the winter. This one got a little sickly when the temperature got down into single digits, and but it has revived itself. This is a very current picture. It's revived itself beautifully this spring. It will grow 3 feet wide or so, and maybe 18 inches tall, and it grows in most parts of the South. So a gorgeous little fern that doesn't really look like some of the other ferns that you have, but this is a holly fern. I'm losing the top of my screen here, but this is a maidenhair fern that came to us as a part of a plant basket that someone brought to our house, and we took this out and put it in our backyard. And it has just really grown well. It does die off in the winter, and it just disappears and gets brown and ugly, and then it pops back up and gets very healthy and works great. You can see what the range is. If most of us are going to be concerned, is the range in my yard, in my garden, and I would say in Atlanta, yes, it is in your range and in your garden. It's a gorgeous accent fern to have in your yard. The netted chain fern, again, I pull these pictures from the Woodland Gardens Center over on Scott Boulevard. They really need a kind of a wet area. It was sort of a wet little swampy area near a creek. They're called a netted chain fern because you can sort of see they do lump up together and attach themselves to each other, very similar to a chain. And really a pretty little fern. My experience in my yard in trying to grow them has not been very good. I don't have a creek. I'm not particularly super wet, but if you do have an area that is wet and you want to cover it, these will cover. They will cover and they will join together, and you will get a big long field of a big long area of that color that you see in the picture there. And as it says in this last bullet, almost to the point of being weedy. So you will have to control them because they do grow fast and they do grow thick. You can see they spread by branching and creeping rhizomes. So they're going to go a lot of places. So if you want something to cover an area, this is a great plant to do that. It needs to be shady, not just filtered, but pretty good shade. And they will grow into a colony that will cover an area. Lady ferns, just a gorgeous fern that I think is one of the prettier ones. This again is from this top picture is from my garden. The bottom three pictures came from some different sites that I copied some photos from. You can see this fern all through the woods. You can see it just about everywhere. It has great coverage. It's beautiful as the sun hits it, and the spread on the fronds is it covers a big wide area. So you can see how that fern looks. These lady ferns, they are a great addition to your garden. These ferns have their sori, they have their reproductive area hidden in a sort of a discreet way, and so that's where they get this name for the lady fern or female fern. I think it's because they're elegant and graceful as opposed to the other description. But regardless, it is a great fern to use in an area where you want to cover ground and have height, as opposed to the chain fern that we looked at earlier. These will give some great height. I think the ones in these pictures are going to probably be about 3 to 4 feet high, and they're going to cover a very wide area. And as they cover that, they're going to knock weeds out, and it's going to be gorgeous. They will die off at the end of the fall and come back again next spring. One of my favorites, the painted fern or Japanese painted fern, a similar look to a lady fern or a wood fern, but just the beautiful part of this fern is the coloring. You will get silvers and grays and whites and a burgundy, and this is just a hidden gem. You can have green, green, green everywhere in your garden. And if you have a Japanese painted fern just kind of sneaking in from the side or kind of subtly coming into the corner or maybe under another plant, it's just such a surprise and such a beautiful plant. The color is wonderful. The textures are wonderful. The ones that I have don't get super large and spread, but they're delicate. The ones I have, you may have a different experience. The ones that I have are delicate, and they sort of hide and they pop up in a kind of a cool little place. And I think you'll just enjoy having these painted ferns in your garden, and they're just a great addition. The wood fern. This is a picture from a friend's farm, again, out down by a creek. It's different in that it does not sprawl out or spread out. It's very upright. So if you have an area, kind of the neat thing about ferns is finding a place where they the shape of that fern will fit. So I don't want to just go through these one at a time and say, oh, well, there's another, there's another, there's another. I'd like for you to get an idea that if you have an area that could support upright foliage and needs a really dark green plant, this plant, a Christmas fern, we'll look at a Christmas fern in a minute. Those are the types of plants that will fill some areas where other areas, like the area that I showed you with my lady ferns, those you want those to cover out in the sun to hit them differently. So it's interesting and fun to experiment with these in the area of your garden. So how's the sun striking a certain area? How are other plants relating to these ferns? Maybe you've got a fence or a rock wall or a deck or a garage area, somewhere where there's a corner. This might be the perfect fern for this, a log fern or a wood fern. You'll notice as you read about ferns or you listen to us talk about it today, you'll notice that a lot of ferns have 2 different names, and we talk about those 2 or 3 different ways. A lot of the ferns structure might have 2 or 3 different names. So I love this fern. I have one of these, and they're really neat. And I have it in an area that can support that height and that upright structure. It's not going to flop over and spread out. It's going to give you that straight upright look. The southern fern, or the southern woods fern, or the southern shield fern. The one on the right is took several weeks ago. It looks a lot better today than it did a couple of weeks ago. It died off over the winter and was unhappy with our cold weather. Mine is not quite as big as the one on the left, but it will get big, and it's a great little fern. It's this says a shaggy shield fern. It is shaggier. It will its fronds aren't as wide as, say, a lady fern. They're a little skinnier and sleeker. But if you have other plants, and I do, underneath all those leafy mess that you see there, I have some other plants that mix in with this. So they really kind of, the fronds themselves sort of stick out and make a little surprise fern. It's not the entire plant you're concerned with here so much as 1 frond or 2 fronds might sneak their way out between some other plant that you plant, either something with color or this is actually right next to my maidenhair fern, and these fronds will kind of stick their nose up between another fern or another plant. And it's really, again, as you're planting these, just take a look at your area and say, what is it I want to accomplish here? What would be fun here to see from a different leaf sticking out? So the southern shield fern or the southern woods fern. This is kind of an interesting story. My friend told me the story, so I included these slides in here. This is This is Eastern hay-seeded fern. You can grow this in your yard, but it grows great out in the woods. This is in the woods at one of my buddy's farms up in Ecology, Georgia. And when I told him that I was working through this fern presentation, he said, "Gosh, you need to hear this story." He said one of the gentlemen that works up there takes his weed eater and cuts all this fern back and sprays all the fern and the spores everywhere, and the patch just gets bigger and bigger and bigger every year. Well, I wanted to see it. I wanted to see this, so I had my friend take this picture. This is from my buddy Tom Lewis's farm. And this is this year's current patch. Well, I don't think it's this year actually. This is a patch of Eastern hay-seeded fern. When this is cut down, it smells like hay, and that's the reason for the name of a hay-scented fern. It grows pretty tall. This is 4 feet tall, and I've got some other pictures. I want to show you how interesting this is. The fern grows in a big colony. I think this colony is about 10 or 15 yards square wide, a very large area. So maybe 30, 40, 50 feet. It says that this is deer. It naturally repels deer. I hope that's right. I'm not 100% sure that's right, but let's hope that it is. But this is what this area up on the top left is what the patch looks like when Mr. McCurley is this gentleman's name. When Mr. McCurley has weed-eated this area down in the late fall, I'm going to say October time period. He weeds it. He uses a weed eater, chops it all down, sprays new spores all over the place, and then you can see in the bottom right there what comes back in the early spring and summer every year. So not only do they get the smell of new mown hay for a few days, but they get this luscious garden of ferns every spring when this grows back, and then they just repeat the process the following year, chop it all down. And I guess this has been, I had not heard this before from anybody else, maybe someone else has, but I guess Mr. McCurley understood this from his dad. They used to come in with a sling blade and chop all this down, and it grew back the next year bigger and stronger. So interesting story for me for the Eastern hay-seeded fern. I don't have any spleen warts. If you do and you are interested in those, I'm going to let you look up more information than I'm going to be able to give you. I guess we all have favorites, and I've just never spent much time on this. It's a very large family of ferns, and they will grow in a lot of places. If you have a rock garden and you have access to a spleen wart fern, the spleen wart, the wart just means it's a plant, and the spleen, I guess there was a discussion over time that this was that medicine from this fern would be healthy for your spleen back in the days of that type of medicine. So the spleen wart fern spreads on its own into rock gardens and sandstone and limestone crevices. If you're walking in the mountains, you can see this. You can especially see the one in the top up left. I've seen a bunch, the ebony spleen wart fern, if you're out on a hike. And if you want to grow this, I'm not going to be able to tell you how to do that today, but I can tell you that if you like it, if you've got a rock garden and you want this to pop out of it, I think this is an attractive little thing. I just don't have any myself, and I don't have any experience with that. Again, from the Woodland Gardens area, I took a picture of this sensitive fern, very similar to some of the other ferns we've looked at, where they have a different shape of a frond and a different grouping. You can see that one grouping, this grouping here, is about as big as that's going to get. That's going to drop over. These are multiple plants down here in the bottom, but it's a beautiful little fern. It is sensitive, and it's sensitive to cold more than others, and so that's where it gets its name. It's not going to be a perfect fern in conditions that are going to colder. If I was in North Georgia, I probably wouldn't see this, and I probably wouldn't try to grow it. But this is growing down by a little creek. You can see that little creek behind there. This is growing down by a little creek over in the Woodland Gardens fern area. So I just wanted you to get a picture of some of these different ferns. The cinnamon fern, again, this came from my friend's farm. What I thought was interesting about this is the cinnamon colored area here with the croziers popping out of the middle of this fern and giving that color to this fern. Again, a very upright plant structure. So if you can grow that or find that to grow in your yard, and you can see each one of these, I hope you've noticed that each one of these, the fronds all are different shapes. They all give you a different look and feel. And this is just a beautiful little upright fronded cinnamon fern sitting down on a little creek bed in Ellijay, Georgia. Just quickly, a couple of ferns that I would want to avoid. There's some reasons for this. Anything that's climbing for me kind of bugs me anyway, but these climbing ferns will take over trees just as ivy or something would. If you have an affinity for these and you like these, I don't want to make you mad by saying you should avoid them, but I do think that it's best if you would keep those trimmed for me so that they don't grow up into the top of a tree or up too high on a wall. But these ferns are invasive and I would not plant them. If you have them and you like the way they look, then and you can keep them wrestled down to the size that you want them, I think that's great. But just as we're looking at ferns that you might avoid, that's one of them. There's some ferns that are poisonous. If you've grown bracken fern, I know a lot of people have bracken fern, but they do contain some poison and some carcinogenic compounds that can be harmful to livestock. Even if they don't eat them, they can as they die off and the spores wash away and wash that into the water, they can be harmful to livestock. One of the interesting symbiotic relationships is the Carolina mosquito fern. It is invasive in aquatic environments, and it will smother an aquatic a little pond. You can see this, if you can see a picture of this little frog here, he's kind of swimming through some Carolina mosquito fern. But what's interesting is this fern is in a symbiotic relationship with a rice growing. So that is something where this fern is important for industry, and yet if we don't control it on a farm around a pond, then it's going to take over and it's going to cover and cover up a little pond and do damage to the animals that are in there, and of course eventually kill off the oxygen in the water and kill off the fish and other frogs other that would be a part of that pond. So just some ideas of ferns to avoid. In this discussion today, a lot of the information that I gathered from here came from the University of Georgia Extension publication. I think a lot of you probably know how to use this, but if you don't, when you get this, when you receive an email from us and you get this information back from us, you'll see how you can go to this website and just use it like a Google site. If you know a bulletin number, the bulletin number for ferns was 737. So I keep that in, and this is the information that I found from about ferns that I didn't know. So you can determine the life cycle of a fern, what kind of temperature, humidity, how it needed to grow. Anything that you want to know about growing that has been researched and put out on this extension website, this is the way to go find that. And they have their own site. I have this as extension UGA edu. There actually, I believe there's a publications.uga.edu that's maybe a little bit easier for you to use. But if you want to use, if you want some information, very complete, this is a great place to go and find that. So I wanted to put that up here so that you would know that I used this site for some of the information and some of the photographs and some of the different things that you saw today that I did not take in my own yard. Might have come, most likely came from a UGA extension bulletin of some sort. So keep this handy, and during the year you can go back and use this resource. I'm going to stop now and ask if anybody has questions. Lee, have you fielded questions for us today?
Yes, we've got a few questions for you. The first one is from one of our viewers who is watching on Facebook Live. And Dee Dee asks, are most ferns considered deer resistant? I have lots of deer around.
Well, I made the comment on deer, and I don't think most ferns are considered deer resistant, but some are. And I think we can get a list. You can get a list of them. I showed the eastern hay fern, which calls itself not only deer resistant, but deer just sort of, it's a repellent for deer. I don't have deer in my yard. I have deer in the area, but they don't come in my yard. So if I don't have any experience that there are any certain ferns that are more resistant than others. I know they eat ferns, but I don't know that they eat all ferns.
You're very lucky there, Danny. Okay, one of our viewers on Zoom has said, you just mentioned ferns spread rapidly. I'm not having that luck whatsoever. I live in zone 7B, Richmond, Virginia, and I've had 3 ferns growing beautifully in a shady spot for the last 10 years and have never spread, which is frustrating for me. All these ferns were dug up from a neighbor's yard. I was hoping they would spread, but they didn't. Any help with this?
So my recommendation would be, if it's the type of fern, and not every single fern is going to be this way. I don't know what type of fern you have, but if you can look at the bottom of the fern, we showed back at the beginning of the discussion, we showed the fruit band, or the area where all the different spores are lined up on the bottom of the on the bottom of the frond. I would, in your situation, if assuming all the soil around your ferns is very fertile and very loose, I would loosen all that soil just with a little rake. I wouldn't go too deep, but just loosen that up and just manually shake those fronds and or scrape off those with your hands, scrape off those spores and let them drop around and see if you can sort of self-propagate in that area. I think that should work. And if you feel comfortable doing it, you can always divide the ferns you have and move them over a couple of feet and try to expand your little patch of ferns that way. But the propagation technique is going to come from those spores. And I mentioned in the discussion of the eastern hay fern, where that is getting some human assistance with the weed eater. They're spraying those spores around that area and just increasing the size of the patch that way. So try that and see if that works.
Thank you. Recently, I've heard that autumn ferns are under watch as potentially invasive. Can you address that?
I don't know that they're invasive. There may be, and I just don't know the answer to that question, but I will tell you they grow like crazy in my yard. They have, to the person who is not getting ferns to spread, mine do. Mine spread a lot. They spread too thick for me, so I have to thin them, and they grow very, very tall. So it would not surprise me if that was the case. If somebody else on the call can chat in and say, I know that for a fact, but I don't know that they're considered invasive. I haven't seen that. But I will just tell you from experience, if you want a fern that spreads, gets tall, reproduces, the term promiscuous is well applied to the autumn fern.
Thank you. Is there a best time to divide ferns?
You know, I would say not in the fall. To me, I would want to divide them. I like to divide them in the spring because you get some immediate results. I guess you can divide them in the fall. The problem to me for dividing them in the fall is if you then get some really cold weather, you already have a stressed plant. I divided some ferns last spring, and the initial reaction was that they were a little bit angry with me, but ultimately by the end of the year they were happy, and I just sort of kept a watch on them. I think that I don't know that there's one great time or one bad time, but I divide them in the spring.
Okay. The next question, I have a lot of Christmas ferns in a wooded area on my property. Each one of them has a fallen twig, small branch, and a small clump of leaf litter covering the base where the fronds grow from. Is this how they normally grow? Or could it be a perch and nest that birds have made to sleep on? I have lots of birds that spend the night in the woods there, and I think some of them sleep on the ground. Does this harm the fern or impede its growth?
Well, that's a great question about whether or not maybe an animal is in there. I take the leaves out of my Christmas fern either by hand if I can reach them, or with just a leaf blower. If I have a very hardy Christmas fern and I just blow everything out of there, or either pick it out of there with my hand or with some sort of a rake that won't damage the fronds. I get a lot of I have oak trees around my property, and my Christmas fern just gets covered up with debris. So I'm constantly taking it out with my hand. I've not heard of a bird or something nesting in there, but it certainly could be. I guess if you just move the fronds with your hands and get down in there as far as you can get and sort of see if you can make sense of what that is down in there. I don't think it's going to damage. It has not, in my experience, it has not damaged my Christmas fern to have debris down in there, because I can get behind and not take the debris out. It eventually decomposes and just drops down into the bottom of the plant. I take off, for my Christmas fern, I take off all of the dead, where it's sitting, it's very unattractive if I leave the dead fronds on there. So I take all the dead fronds off and just sort of have a clean base from the outside. Looking down from the inside is probably where you would see a bird's nest or sticks or other things. But I take all of that out. But I don't know that I would take out a bird's nest if there was one in there. So you may want to leave that, just if that's what your inclination is.
Okay. I have had a Christmas fern in a pot for a couple of years, and it in the shade, but it doesn't seem to be growing much. Not sure what the problem may be. Any thoughts?
Well, my first thought would be that I would take it out of that pot and put it in the yard if that works for you. It could be that the roots just aren't really happy being in there. I don't know that it's root bound, but it might be. I don't know if you've tried to take it out of the pot and look at it and see if the roots are just bound up in there. But I would, if it were me, I would take it out of the pot, and just using my hands, I would just spread those roots out as far as I could spread them out, and find a place in my yard, preferably not in the direct sun. I had this conversation this morning with a friend who has a Christmas fern in direct sunlight, and it is unhappy. And so it needs to be filtered sun, or a little bit cooler spot than just in direct sunlight. If you want to keep it in the pot and it's not growing, I'd get a bigger pot, because that sounds to me like maybe the roots just aren't really aren't having enough room to support what's up top.
Yeah, I'm thinking the same thing. Okay, then are there ferns that do okay in sunshine?
Somebody else asked me that this morning. I don't know of a good fern. If somebody else does, please chime in. I don't know of a good fern that's going to do very well sitting in the direct sun. I mean, nothing that I have likes that. If it's anything, maybe it's something like an autumn fern that you can put where it gets some direct sun during the day, something that's very, very hardy, and see how well that does. But I don't have a fern in mind that I could say I would want to put in 12 hours of sunlight.
I believe that slide you shared with us, it showed dry and moisture as well as sun and
It
shade.
does. That's a
And
good point.
most of them were toward the shady, those
Yeah.
X's were on the
Right.
shady side.
Right.
Here's a good question. Do snakes hide in ferns like they do in ivy?
I think snakes hide anywhere. I'm careful when I'm careful when I'm in there. You know, if you're in a very thick fern bed, yes. I've had a black snake in my very thick fern bed last summer, and I sort of let him live in there. But he or she was looking for little woodchucks or something that were running around. So a thick, cool area in the summer is going to be snaky. So I wouldn't stick my hand down in something in the middle of snake season without making some noise and rattling around to make sure I knew where I was getting into.
Okay. I'm not sure if you've answered this one. How to best add organic matter to existing planted ferns?
So I mentioned worm casings. I don't know if you have access to that. I mentioned just compost from your garden. And I told you that my process is just to chop up as many times as I can chop up some leaves that have fallen. Let's chop them up with a lawnmower and blow those up underneath. You know, if you drop your organic material as close to the base as you can get, and then down into the middle of the plant itself, the rain's going to wash that down and eventually get that down in there. I don't know that there's any magic formula for how you do it. I think ferns are happy with the place that they have landed. So the organic material that they're around and the water that they're around, as long as they're staying healthy, that's what they need. I don't think you need to do anything else extra. But I have this year spent more time cleaning off around the base of my ferns than I have in years past, just because the cold weather made such a mess of everything. And I think that maybe that is the better way to get organic material up there. You have so many dead fronds from the previous year, so many leaves that blow up under there and twigs. I think just a good cleaning underneath that, and then having the organic material kind of pushed up against the base of the plant and spread out the width of what you think the root ball might be. So say 6 or 8 inches out from the plant, if you want to do that. I don't know that that's a mandatory thing. I think you just deal with ferns as they are healthy. They're fine. When they're unhealthy, you do some of these things like adding material. From what I read and what I know, I've never fertilized a fern, and from what you read, there's no real reason to. Some other people might have a conviction about that one way or the other, but hope that helps.
Okay. Our ghost ferns are less than 1 year old, appear freeze damaged, and I've read it's time to cut dead and damaged fronds. Recommended. I mean, I actually did that today with an
I did too.
fern. Almost every frond was brown, and I'm hoping the new fiddleheads have room to come up now.
Yeah, I've been lucky that the things that I have trimmed away, I could already see the growth of the new fiddleheads, and so I felt pretty confident that I was doing the right thing. But I think we are past the super cold weather. We may get we may get a 50-degree, but I don't think we're going to get another 30-degree night. So I think you're safe to, depending on the shape of your fern and how old it is and how big it is, depends to me on how you approach the trimming. But I think if you can just take some snippers, if they're small, just take some snippers and just start snipping out the dead.
Right. Okay. You obviously have beautiful ferns in your yard. What ferns do you grow in your home?
What ferns do I grow in my home? Well, I have the autumn ferns. I have a holly fern. I have lady ferns. I have the Japanese painted fern. I have a wood fern, a Christmas fern. I think I've got a lot of what's on the list.
Right, right. Okay. Could eastern hay seeded fern be planted, then spread in a pecan orchard with fairly bright light?
Uh, It sounds to me like you could. I was not familiar with the way this grew until I heard this story from my friend. I think that is going to grow. It's going to want to be under a canopy, but I don't know that it needs to be in the super dark. I mean, this is out in the middle of this is next to a pasture, so it's got plenty of daylight, but it is filtered under some trees. So it's not like it's back in a dark place. So it sounds to me like a pecan orchard would be just perfect for it.
Yeah. Okay. What is the fern you see covering the forest floor in the mountains?
Covering what?
Covering the forest floor in the mountains. I'm not sure it's just one fern, right?
Well, I wouldn't know that it's just one fern either. I mean, I mentioned the netted chain fern, which I think is really pretty. And if it's covering an area, it's going to be something like that, where it has spread, either spread its rhizomes together and grown one large plant, or it's a bunch of little plants that are connected together. It could be that. It could be if it doesn't look that way, if it looks more like upright fronds that are 2 or 3 feet tall, it could certainly be wood fern, southern wood ferns. It could be lady ferns. Lady ferns are everywhere, so it could be a combination of all those things. But if it's covering the forest floor and it looks like let's say it's 3 feet tall with a sort of a traditional looking frond, what I would call a traditional looking frond, it's probably either a lady fern or a wood fern. That'd be my guess.
Right. And nowadays there's either apps or Google Lens where you could take a picture and identify it. Or you could actually, if you're walking in the woods, you could take a picture and send it to your local extension and try to figure out what some of those are. Is pine straw a bad mulch around ferns?
Well, before we do that, let's go back just a second. I think you brought up a great point there, Lee. For the person who was wanting to identify that fern, as I was going through building this presentation for today, I pulled together a bunch of stuff from a bunch of different places, and I heavily relied on the app on your iPhone called Picture This. And the Picture This app, there's several of these that are out there, but I like Picture This. You can take using your camera from your iPhone, you just take a picture of whatever it is you're trying to identify. And if you get a good angle and a good picture, it will give you the name of the fern, the exact name of the fern, and some information on it. It might even tell you whether it's going to grow well. It'll give you a botanical name. So use an app like that. There's several of them out there, but I really like the one called Picture This, and that would identify that fern for you. So that's a good point, Lee.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what was the next question?
Is pine straw a bad mulch around ferns? Or is that even needed?
I don't know that you need mulch around ferns. If you need mulch and you want pine straw, then pine straw is good. Some people like pine straw for one reason or another. Somebody mentioned snakes. My wife does not like pine straw because she thinks snakes are in pine straw. If I'm using a mulch that is not a compost or something I've built myself, by the way, if I was going to do it, I would do it for my own yard. I don't like the idea of going out and buying compost from some place where you don't really know what got in that compost, because you could be bringing home poison ivy or some strange thing that's going to grow in your yard. But if you're going to go buy bags of compost, I buy the little mini bark wood chips, and that just seems to be the better look for me around my yard. But I think pine straw is fine. I don't think it's going to hurt the plant. Most ferns are going to want something acidic. That's just a general statement, not all of them, but they're generally going to want something acidic. So I think pine straw is fine. If that's the look you have already some other place, I don't think you're going to hurt the fern.
Okay. We still got a few more. I was hoping to hear comments concerning the resurrection fern. I have seen this fern only once, growing up the side of a deciduous tree adjacent to the parking lot of an old church in Spalding County. Any comments on the resurrection fern?
Well, I don't know much about the resurrection fern. I shied away. I did look at it to put in today, but I just don't. For me personally, the climbing type of plant, the climbing ferns and whatever it is that's climbing, I just personally shy away from them. It's not the kind of, I mean, they're beautiful if you know what you're doing with them, and I just must not know what I'm doing with them because they never strike me as being interesting or attractive. Some people, sometimes folks can do them and do them right, but I don't have any experience with the resurrection fern. Sorry.
Okay. Here's sort of a specialty question. What ferns are best for terrariums?
Wow.
That would be like mini.
Yeah, it'd have to be something. It'd have to be something small, or something that you could put in and just sort of keep it contained. I think most of the things we looked at today could probably, most of the things in your yard, I mean, obviously you're not going to put something in there that grows 3 or 4 feet tall. Look at the chart that you'll get when we send you an email, and look at the size and look for, I guess I'd look for something that was, the smallest thing you could put in there, and then just try to keep it snipped and under control. Depending on how big the terrarium is, I guess. If the terrarium is 10 feet long, you can do a lot of things, but if it's 3 feet long, then you're kind of stuck. There may be, and I sort of glossed over and didn't spend any time on spleenwort, but it's possible if you have some rocks in your terrarium that you could put the smallest of a spleenwort in there and just keep it manicured in some way. Don't let it get out of hand. If it starts to grow fronds where you don't want them, take them off. That's the only thing I can think of.
Okay, Danny. One of our fellow master gardeners has commented that autumn ferns have been invasive in her yard north of Atlanta. They're coming up everywhere. So that was just from Diane.
So there you go. There's the answer to that question. I'm sorry that I didn't know that, but thank you for that answer.
It depends on the mini environment that I guess you have. And here's a good question. What's your favorite companion plant with your garden ferns?
Probably for us, my wife and I both garden together. Probably for us, it's hydrangea, and we have a very interesting crepe myrtle that blooms white and has an unusual shape to it, and that's where our big autumn ferns are underneath that. So I would guess that combo for us is probably the best combo. They grow, both those things I mentioned grow our hydrangea plants are very, very tall. They have some space underneath. I keep them trimmed out underneath, and I just let those ferns grow into there.
Okay. Another viewer has commented that the blue cloak fern will take some sun and likes dry soil. To answer that question about ferns that like sun, blue cloak fern.
No, I'm not familiar.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's on the list of the southern ferns.
Yeah, I'm going to go spend some time on it though, because I've had that question a bunch of times, and I have 2 different yards. I've got a front yard that's all sun and a backyard that's mostly shade. So I would love to I'd love to find the answer to that question myself. Okay,
and one viewer asked, can you send the chart in Excel so we can easily add a deer resistance column instead of retyping? Do you remember where the chart was from? Was it from UGA or?
Yes, and it is.
So it can be found by going to.
Yes, but it's not in Excel. It is in. Well, I can't remember the format, but actually I did strip out the columns and put them into an Excel sheet. Lee, it's possible I could send you this Excel sheet if somebody wants it and modify it, but we should see who that belongs to first.
I tell you, whoever wrote that, if you want to send an email to North Fulton Master Gardeners at Gmail, I'll put you in touch with Danny Morris. Let's see. Someone also said ebony spleenwort can take some sun. Can I use ferns to hold soil on an embankment?
Sure, if you have enough of them. It depends on the embankment. I don't know if you're thinking of it in terms of like a spread of ivy. I think it would take a long time to do that, but I don't see why you couldn't. I mean, the rhizome structure in a great many of these is very dense and thick, and so it would certainly hold soil. If you're just a small place, I would say right off immediately, I would say yes. But if it's a big, long bank, I think you'd have a lot of work to do it, but I'm not sure. And you'd also want to make sure that that bank was conducive to the rest of the surroundings. If it's gonna, I mean, if you have a deciduous plant and it doesn't work well for you during a rainy winter, then I think it doesn't work as well. I mean, you just have to consider the situation of what the bank looked like, what ferns you were going to put there, and how many trees and bushes were around to shade them.
Okay. And I think, Danny, we've got more questions, but this will be the last question. Can you tell us your favorite source of ferns? She can't find a vendor for the netted chain fern. So a special nursery or special place to get ferns?
Boy, I don't know where you could buy that either. The ones that I don't have any in my yard, as I said, and you could. I've used just about every nursery in town. I'm trying to think of the one that's up in that it has a fair number of specialty items up in the Roswell area. I'll think of it in a minute, maybe before we go off, but I'm not sure where you could buy netted chain fern. I've been to the Goodness Grows area out in Loganville. They have a big, wide, a bunch of things out there. You know, I use pikes. I use, but most of the ferns I have, I either bought them at a plant sale or I split them from somebody else and brought them to my yard. So I'm not a great source for where to go buy them.
And I know, Danny, you're going to be telling us about Garden Fair in a few minutes. So I'm going to sign off and let you continue.
Yeah, so that's a good lead in. A couple of things I wanted to tell you about. Let's just move on. There's several things toward the end of this presentation. I won't use a whole lot more time, but I did want to make you aware of some things. The North Fulton Master Gardeners Group and all the Master Gardeners Group are part of the UGA extension, and we're dedicated to sustainable practices in landscape. If you have interest in that in your yard or interested in that in your business, you can have your business, for instance, certified that you are that you practice sustainable growing habits in your landscape. So just take a look at that when you get this presentation. I wanted to offer thanks for some sponsors that have been a part of North Fulton Master Gardener. This, not only this presentation, but around, I'm gonna leave that up there for just a minute. You can see some of who those folks are. And as well, I want to thank the media sponsors that mention us on the radio or put something on Nextdoor, the various news outlets that would be a part of that. So thank you to all of those. There's another list of those. Next week, I want to make you aware that there's one more presentation in this lecture series, and next week there'll be a discussion of the plants that you can use in your water gardens, both annual and perennial plants. So that's coming up next week. You can sign up the same way you signed up for this. It's the same time next Sunday at 2 o'clock. And you see the links down there. This will be in the email that you receive. Also, you can view this presentation and previous presentations on the YouTube channel, and I think on Facebook. Lee may know more about how to reach the Facebook one than I do. I use Facebook, but I don't go back and look. But YouTube is very easy to go back and see these. So if you wanted to go back, for instance, and see about growing figs, or the presentation from last week about the insects that might be good or bad in your garden, those are out there. So just a quick reminder of that. Anything that you want to know about North Fulton Master Gardeners is on all of the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can take a look at all of those. You also, the traditional ways for you to donate to this organization, either directly as a donor, or if you want to, if it's in your area and you want to join the North Fulton Master Gardeners and you are a master gardener, then this is a way for you to do that. There is a way for you to order plants through North Fulton Master Gardener Group and have those plants delivered UPS to your door. That through April 4th, you can do that, and you can see where the how to do that and how the money is used for that. So if you want some plants, it may be that you can order a chain netted fern. So if you want to take a look at that and see how to get that ordered and shipped to your house, I just asked somebody today how that worked, and they said it just shows up on the front doorstep via UPS. The garden fair, a plant sale where you don't get the plant shipped to you, you pick them up off the counter. There'll be some booths. You can see that this is at Willis Park on Saturday the 29th, sponsored by our participant there is the North Fulton Master Gardeners, and you can come and be a part of a garden fair and buy plants there from that plant sale. You can see the date is April 29th, Saturday. It starts at 9 o'clock in the morning. And then finally, there will be 5 homes, gardens of the Master Gardeners in the Sandy Spring area. So really nice gardens put together by the Master Gardeners in the Sandy Springs area. You can see that there's a tour that you can attend on June the 3rd. That starts at 10 o'clock in the morning. And you'll be able to sign up using a QR code or a website to sign up and buy tickets for that. And you can see the pricing, and it should just be a terrific garden tour. You'll be able to move from garden to garden and see what other master gardeners are doing in their yards. And please don't forget to fill out a survey for this talk today, so that we'll have a chance to see what you liked and what you didn't like, and what you might want to see in a future talk. You might want to hear about different plants or different ideas that we could put together another lecture for. So very happy to do that, and we'll be very pleased and happy if you will fill out this survey. So that is our last slide of the day. Lee, if you want to take us out from here, I think that we appreciate your time today. We thank you very much for being a part of the lecture, and I hope it was meaningful for you. And if you have further questions, you can contact us through the email site. And that is the end of our discussion.